First off, before we start with David Schulman's introduction of Professor Venkatachalapathy, I just wanted to, just so that everyone knows who our panel presenters are, I just wanted to go through kind of the list of names on the back of the program, and when I come to you, could you just sort of raise your hand, and then people will be familiarized with who you are. List of participants. We have Bernard Bate from Yale University. Raise your hand. That's Barney. A graduate of Chicago and in anthropology. Sasha Ebeling, whom you're already familiar with, from the Salk Department. Specialist in Tamil literature. Lakshmi Holmstrom, a renowned translator of Tamil short stories and poetry, and of course Salma's novel. Now the filmmakers K.P. Jayashankar and Anjali Montero, I think, have stepped out, but will be returning soon, so we will say hello to them when they come back. James Lindholm is over there, our Tamil instructor, and also a graduate of the University of Chicago, friend of Norman's. Sally Noble, the director of the South Asia Center, associate director, functional, I mean, not, well, anyway, she was a very important person, VIP. And Paula Richman, Oberlin, in front here, from the religion department, also a Div School Chicago graduate? No. Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry. We were incorrect. I apologize. And Salma, of course, who has spoken to us this morning. We all know who she is. Very good session this morning. David Schulman, over here, visiting the Salk Department, and specialist in poetry and poetics in Tamil, Telugu, and Sanskrit. Sam Sudananda is right here from Columbia, from the MILAC department, where he teaches Tamil, and we're very grateful to have him here, and also for his help with interpretation with Salma. And then finally, we come to our keynote speaker, and so I'm going to save this introduction for David Schulman, who is appointed for this very task. So, now David.
Okay, remind you once again to introduce yourself, please.
So, it's my pleasant task, actually it's a privilege and an honor to introduce Professor A.K. Venkatachalapathy from the Madras Institute of Development Studies. Actually, Chalapathy, I'm going to call him Chalapathy. He's one of these people who one says about them at moments like this that they need no introduction, and then one usually goes on to give a long introduction. I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity that's been given me to actually say a few things, in fact, but it's true that he needs no introduction, because I think probably everybody in this room knows his work well, and certainly anybody in our generation who's interested in the history, cultural history of South India, especially the Tamil region, has read his essays and knows them well, because Chalapathy is certainly the most adventurous, intellectually stimulating mind among the historians working on the modern period in South India in the last several decades. Actually, as it happens, although for many years I've been wanting to meet him, and we have many mutual friends, and people have often wanted us to meet. I didn't happen to have the privilege of meeting him until about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago in Adayar, where we had a very kind of joyful meeting. And of course, I immediately felt that I was in the presence of a kindred spirit. But I just have to tell you that in fact, we share, I think, a much deeper affinity based upon profound metaphysical principles, because those of you who know his work will know that he has a famous essay, which is actually the title essay in his volume of English historical essays, called "In Those Days There Was No Coffee." And I think there are quite a few people in this room who know by now that at least in my own idiosyncratic cosmology, coffee is a matter of the most profound existential and metaphysical significance, really an embodiment of ultimate human values, and perhaps the only true metaphysical principle to which I hold without compromise. And so a person who was prepared actually to write an essay on the history of coffee consumption in South India is obviously a man very close to my heart. It's hard for us even to imagine a world in which people in Madras or anywhere else in South India did not drink coffee. But actually there was such a time, of course, and you, of course, can see something of the spirit of intellectual adventure which goes with the attempt to trace the history of this particular Madrasi cultural habit. It's a bit like what Ashish Nandi once said about cricket. He said that cricket was an Indian game that was by mistake invented in Scotland. And I suppose one could say the same thing about coffee. It's a kind of a Middle Eastern drink that actually really belongs in Tamil Nadu and has, but only by some odd historical chance, wandered away to the Middle East. I want to say a few things about the two major sides of Chalapathy. Let me begin with the academic intellectual profile. He's actually published rather a lot of books. I think looking at the list of publications, around 20 books, including some edited volumes, including a very beautiful book in Tamil, the Muchandi Ilakyam, about Tamil chapbooks, Tamil, a particular kind of Tamil popular literature. By the way, I also wanted to say that although Chalapathy is published very extensively in English, I highly recommend to the people in this room to read him in Tamil, because his Tamil is really a kind of exquisite academic prose, a kind of model, I think, for what we can hope for. And it has a particular richness which, given a choice, I certainly would recommend that you read his Tamil essays, including the Tamil versions of the essays that have also been published in English. He was trained at JNU, and he wrote a dissertation on the history of Tamil publishing, really. And in fact, he's the world's expert on Tamil publishing in the last 200 years. I actually believe there's probably no single Tamil book that was published in the last 200 years that Chalapathy hasn't actually met and welcomed personally. He certainly has an astonishing knowledge, which has come into play in many of the essays that he has published. He also has a very lovely book. It's called Chennai, Not Madras, which I recommend to you. Perspectives on Chennai. It was published by Marg Publications about 2 years ago. And I just might mention that he's engaged in writing a biography of Periyar, and perhaps when that is done, a long-term project on Chidambaram Pillai. So these are works that we can certainly look forward to. And I could actually say rather a lot more about his academic profile, but I think maybe that's enough for now. I just want to say that there is the other side, which is that Chalapathy embodies in a very remarkable way, I think, the kind of essence of the life of a Tamil man of letters. I suppose today one should say a Tamil person of letters in Madras, or in the Tamil cultural sphere. He lives the literary life with a very great intensity. He also is the author of a fantastic translation of Sundara Ramaswamy's J.J. Silup Kuripuhal. And those of you who know the book in Tamil will also know how enormously difficult, almost impossible actually, it is to produce a good, clean, lyrical English translation of this very remarkable novel. So he succeeded, I think, really very remarkably in this respect. And I can't conclude this introduction without mentioning the sacred name of Pudumai Pitan, who is, in a way, I think, the kind of presence, hidden presence in this room, because he's been mentioned actually several times today. Salma mentioned him in the course of talking about writers that she has read and cared for. And here again, I think one could say about Chalapathy that he's the world's expert on the writings of Pudumai Pitan. He's in the process of compiling what would normally be called a kind of critical edition of the works of Pudumai Pitan, a variorum edition, of which 4 volumes have come out. Is that right? And we have 2 more to look forward to, including a volume of critical essays by Chalapathy about Pudumai Pitan, who is arguably well, without any doubt, actually, he's one of the most important of the modern Tamil prose writers, in some ways perhaps the most original writer of that generation. So I think without further ado, I'll ask him to come and give his keynote address, please.
Thank you very much. I'm deeply honored. I know David Schulman is a great scholar. He's also a generous man. Thanks, David. I'm overwhelmed at being here for two reasons. I met Norman Cutler 20 years ago when I was about 20. He came to the Maramalaedigal Library when I was working there. He came with Lee Weissman, and we met him. And even at that moment, he was a quiet man, but you could see that he was not a shallow man, deep waters, I could say. And then, of course, subsequently, 10 years later, I was here teaching for a while, and Norman made it very, very pleasant for me here to stay. And as Barney mentioned it this morning, reading his wonderfully written essay in Shelley's volume, reminds us what a great scholar he is. The second reason is that on the 31st of August, 2000, that was the day Salma's first collection of poems was published. That was the first time I saw her. I got the book hot from the press, and I saw her with Sundar Ramaswamy, and I gave the copy to her. She was, what you heard in the morning was only a very small part of her life. I saw a very tentative young woman, unsure of herself. Of course, I had read all her work, and we had discussed her work with so many friends, but seeing her in person, very, you read all that she had written into her personality. And now, 6 years later, I see, she's so confident, and she's here, and she's the featured author. So for that reason also, I'm very, and she's being translated by one of the most, probably the most important translator working in Tamil now, Lakshmi Holmstrom. And of course, as you would have heard this morning and also tomorrow, you know that only a person like Lakshmi Holmstrom can do justice to the writing of Salma. What I propose to do over the next 30 or 35 minutes is to give an overview of Tamil literature since 1947. I could, in a sense, call it leading up to Salma. Basically, it is trying to situate the phenomenal growth in the Tamil literary output, quantitatively and qualitatively, in the last 10 years. I just want to trace that moment from about 1947. At the time of Indian independence, even though Congress would be the most popular party and Indian nationalism, was still the most important political and social force in Tamil Nadu, the Dravidian movement had already emerged. And within the first decade, I think the Dravidian movement, the Tamil identity politics, largely defined political discourse and social discourse in Tamil Nadu. You could say that 1967, that was the year when DMK came to power, the Congress lost. But even by the 50s, the Congress and Indian nationalist forces were reduced to playing a very reactive role in Tamil politics and in Tamil culture. The agenda, the terms of the debate were being set by the Dravidian movement. It was also at that time you find the emergence of a commercial media of mass circulated weekly magazines, most of them. A combination of these two, the agenda being set by the Dravidian movement and Tamil nationalist politics, and the growth of the commercial media, the mass circulated magazines. It was in this context, in literary production, there was a clear split. For almost 30-40 years, literary production in Tamil Nadu, went on two parallel tracks. One kind of writing was produced and distributed and diffused in society through these mass circulated magazines. But on the other, there was a self-conscious modernist writing which thrived separately. By about the 60s, this cleavage was so clear and there was no kind of give and take. It was either the mass circulated magazines and the popular writers being completely oblivious of the modernist writing, new writing coming from the other side, and while on the other side, the self-consciously modern writers, they're completely distanced from the mass circulated magazines. This is best epitomized in the emergence of this phenomenon of the little magazines. Little magazines, though I think it is fairly self-explanatory, it has a number of other aspects which need to be factored in. These magazines, first, they were very conscious reaction to the mass circulated magazines. Here we have to remember that, in the 30s, 40s and 50s, the best of writings which we celebrate to this day, they were written in these popular magazines, which had not actually become really big, but still there was no cleavage between, little magazines and mass circulated magazines. In the 30s and 40s and even till the 50s, the best writings of whether it was, Pudumai Pittan or Kupa Rajagopalan or M.V. Venkataraman or Na Pichamurthy, they were being published. Of course, Pudumai Pittan is an exception. He never wrote in Anandavidan except for one story. All these writers were writing in Kalaimagal. They were writing in journals like Kalaimagal was very important, which was incidentally, one of the honorary editors was U.S. Salma there. Anandavidan was also a forum for these kind of writings. But you find by the very fag end of the 1950s, the little magazine tradition begins. And once again, the symbol of this kind of movement was the Eduthu. It was a monthly magazine. It was only 200 copies were printed of these magazines, and they were up to their gill with the latest in American and English writing, and also to a certain extent European writing through translations. And when this movement began of these little magazines, they consciously positioned themselves against, as I said, the popular magazine. They would completely eschew politics. They eschewed commercialism. The word popular was completely anathema. Anything, in fact, it was taken to such an extent that, if any good work was read by a large audience, immediately, that would be looked at with a great amount of suspicion. And this little magazines also, constructed a tradition for themselves. They thought of, some of the earlier failed journals as the beginning of the little magazine tradition. While, for instance, Manikudi, the classic journal, which was started in 1933, my own experience, I read about it when I was growing up. It was this, the great fountainhead of Tamil literary modernism. But when you actually went back to the journal, I found that, it was trying to be a popular journal. It was a serious journal, it was a popular journal. They were trying to do it, but they failed. And all the stalwarts of this modernist group, or whatever we could call it for the moment, the titans of the little magazines, if I may mix metaphors, they were actually publishing in the 40s and 50s popular magazines. They were trying to do it, but they failed. Once again, the classic example, Kana Subramaniam, who was widely celebrated as championing this little magazine tradition. The journals that he published in 1939, Suravali and the later journal, he was certainly engaging with the popular. He was not, restricting himself to literature defined in a very narrow sense. MVV ran a journal called Teni. Kupara himself, Kupa Rajagopalan himself ran a journal which was certainly addressed to a larger audience. But by the turn of the 50s and the beginning of the 60s, this was in Tamil literary culture the heyday of little magazines. Number of journals were published, Ilakya Vattam, Saraswati, and leading up to in the 1970s to Kasara Tapra and Pragne. As I said, they were elitist, they restricted their circulation, strongly condemnatory of popular politics, and given the caste and class composition of these writers, to which I'll come very shortly, they had a certain visceral anathema to the Dravidian movement. So anything associated with the Dravidian movement was looked down upon, and the politics was, the unstated politics was always, condemnatory of Dravidian movement. This, cocooning of literary production in the 60s also gave the space for, experimental writing, and that was the time when the free verse, Pudukavithai, new poetry, completely liberated from prosodic shackles as they were called. The Pudukavithai becomes, the new poetry becomes an accepted genre. The magazine Eduthu published, consistently published new poetry, encouraged debate on this, and it was running parallel to the kind of poetry that was being produced from the Dravidian movement. So I was very interested to find that in 1964, when Bharatidasan, the fiery poet of the Dravidian movement, died, I was very curious to see the response of this group of literary writers, especially in Eduthu. They had to acknowledge that he was a major figure, but it is a very critical and kind of undermining of his reputation that you see in their obit pieces. It was in this this two parallel stream of literary production. Very few were able to break this barrier or bridge these two streams. The only exception I can think of is Jayakanthan. That is also the reason I think as Salma mentioned in the morning, many of us, people of my generation, my earlier generation, next generation, we would read Jayakanthan at the early stages of our reading and literary career, and then at a certain point get fed up and then move on. But Jayakanthan was very important because he could articulate a new voice, a very strong, powerful individualism, and a certain approach to literature which was completely lacking in mainstream publications. So Jayakanthan was an exception. In that sense, he also, he also had something to do with G. Nagarajan. G. Nagarajan's writings and Jayakanthan's writing share a lot of commonalities. But the kind of romanticism that Jayakanthan brought into, say, for instance, the portrayal of this good prostitute, which you can, of course, trace back to, Devdas and other kind of writings. Jayakanthan romanticized certain notions of this, which went very well with the mass circulated magazines. But this leads up only to the 70s. By the beginning of the 80s, or even a little earlier, there was a felt crisis in the literary world. I remember this very well because 1981-82 was the birth centenary of Subramanya Bharati. That was the time when I started going, to meetings and readings. That moment is still, I can remember it. And the dissatisfaction with the existing literary world, the forms of literary production and literary politics, this is extremely well expressed in this brilliant novel of Sundar Ramaswamy. 1981, he publishes J. Kuripagal. It's a very interesting novel. I'll just want to summarize it in 2 or 3 lines. The form of that novel. It is written as the novel is structured as a fictional biography of a Malayalam writer, and this biography is actually being written by a Tamil writer. So this gives the scope for Sundar Ramaswamy to express his misgivings and dissatisfaction with the Tamil literary world, but not directly, by an apparent critique of literary production in Kerala. And one of the running themes of this little magazine tradition was it's not only its anathema towards the Dravidian movement, but also its deep distrust of left politics, especially the Stalinist politics of the communist parties, which was the lot of the communist parties in those days. So that stream was also there, and you had these camps of progressives and reactionaries, as these people were called. Looking back at it 20, 30 years down the line, we see that what a completely what a complete waste of time these people had, indulged in. It sheds no light or heat. Great amount of paper and ink was wasted in those times. But the progressives, because of the way their organizations were structured and the kind of discourse that they adopted, they always could corner serious, introspective writers, and it was always a kind of burden that any genuine, sincere writer had to face. If you introspected too much and you had too much self-doubts, you would be called a CIA agent, existentialist, all kinds of names were called. It was in this context that J.J. Sala Kuripugal comes out as it's the language that it uses, a certain manifesto quality that some of the passages have, the sharpness of the language, the metaphorical use of language, all these they completely captured the imagination of a whole generation of readers, not writers. Throughout my my reading and writing career, I've seen very few writers who thought it was a good novel, because every one of them saw themselves in the novel and they felt that they had come out very badly in it. But for the readers, it was a different experience. In fact, Sundar Ramasamy told me some 10 years ago that since the publication of J.J. Sala Kuripugal, not a month has passed without getting at least one letter or one visit from a young reader. Somewhere in some corner of Tamil Nadu, he would get a letter, or some young man would come to see him. Like he saw one person on October 19th, 1986. Modesty prevents me from disclosing the identity of that person. And that I was reminded of that once again, when Salma mentioned it this morning. This novel and the personality of Sundar Ramasamy has a very important part to play in what happened in the 1990s, which is what I now come to. Once again, in the 1980s, one could already hear the breakup of USSR coming. Perestroika really caused a big crisis among the left intellectuals. And within the left movement, there was also the ultra-left movement, the CPI-ML, the crisis that were engendered by the great amount of violence that was unleashed on them from the 1960s to the 70s. That is one movement which I do not know much about. I know it only from secondhand. But in the 90s, many of these left movements were getting disillusioned with armed action, and they were increasingly working in civil society. They were engaging with mass politics, trying to put up fronts. And it was at that time some of these ultra-left movements were beginning to engage with the question of caste. Because in Tamil Nadu, even the Dravidian movement had foregrounded the caste question, but the left movement and all those inspired by the left movement pretended or tried to ignore caste. You find the way how they ignore many of these things, like everything is postponed until the revolution. So once the revolution comes, all these questions would be sorted out. So in fact, in the J.J. Sala Kuripugal, J.J. asks, I have a lot of lice in my hair. Should I wait for the revolution to come, or should I delouse myself immediately? This kind of thing. So caste comes into a big way, and I think in 1989, many of these ultra-left organizations came together to discuss the question of caste. And 1990, of course, fundamentally changed many things in India. In August 1990, V.P. Singh, while at that moment was only a smart political move, only later he became a statesman. The government decision to implement the Mandal Commission recommendations, completely changed everything. What changed in Tamil Nadu was that Tamil Nadu did not get anything out of it, in the sense that there was already a strong reservation policy in place. But it was from that time people started looking to Tamil Nadu as a kind of a precursor. Until then, Tamil Nadu is always the sore thumb that sticks out, some vague place which seemed to have nothing to help explain or understand about the larger Indian nation, all those things. And then immediately following Mandal came the Masjid, Babri Masjid, Ram Janmabhoomi crisis. It fundamentally changed the way how people began to look at themselves, about their identity, about the nation, about politics, everything. And Tamil Nadu, even though, it has a long history of not having any communal clashes. Despite that, the issues that were raised by the Mandal Masjid debate, brought about a great amount of churning. And it is at this moment, the Dalit movement also emerges. Historically in Tamil Nadu, as we know, the non-Brahmin movement has been very strong. But the Dalit question was subsumed within the non-Brahmin category of the non-Brahmin. This begins to, break up, crumble, because of the increasing power that the other backward castes were having and the impact it was having on the Dalits at the ground level. So from about the 1990, that was also the year of Ambedkar's centenary, the publication of his writings, the number of meetings that were held. I did a lot of field work for my doctoral research at that time. Any city I went to, any town I went to, wherever I traveled, I could see Ambedkar statues coming up. It was at this moment you also had the writing of self-conscious Dalit writing, declared Dalit writing. Before I actually get to it, I just want to bring in another factor into this survey of Tamil literary production. By about the early 80s, the crisis that I was talking about, the little magazine tradition had fizzled out. Because there was too many issues to be contended with, and one could not contend with all these things within the framework of progressive reactionary, art for art's sake, art for people's sake, or within debates about the new poetry. So through the 80s, there are very few little magazines that were published. And the 1990s changes all that. The very beginning of 1990s, three very important magazines begin to be published. One was a journal called Subhamangala. It was financed by a chit company because it liked somebody, a fellow traveler of the left movement. So they wanted to do something for him, so they started a journal for him. So the whole journal was subsidized, and for the first time a literary magazine was published with multicolor wrappers and photo offset printed pages. So this editor of this journal, Komal Swaminathan, he is dead, may his soul rest in peace. It would be very difficult to say this in Tamil Nadu. He was a phenomenally ill-read man, but that was his strength. Because he had not read anybody, he did not have opinions. Okay? So he just went by names. So he created this forum when there was nothing for people to write. One could not write in Ananda Vigadan or Kalki or other magazines, and there were no little magazines. So like a railway platform, all well-known names from various groups. It could be Dravidian, it could be CPI, CPM, CPI-ML, fellow travelers, independent writers, reactionaries, right reactionaries, former CA agents, present CA agents, everybody wrote. That created, and because this journal was published at a time when all this turbulence was going on in India at that time, it gave the space for this publication. And also because the editor was a very poor editor, he wouldn't know what to cut out. Whatever was written was published. So it was a free for all. And that was the churning, that helped people to write. So for the first time, people were reading other kinds of writings. Because I do remember that, at least two things I remember. I know that CPIM Literary Front gave a diktat that nobody should read. J. Sundaram Swami. I also know that, for instance, the ML historian, G. Kesavan, once again the left party said that you should not read him because he's quoting Marx and Engels too often. It's very uncomfortable. So this kind of diktats were there. And in that context, a journal like this, which had within a single issue the entire spectrum of Tamil literary writing in all its confused extravaganza. So Subhamangala was published. It was published from 90 to 95. Then there was this other very important journal called Nirappirigai. It was edited by a collective. It would be published irregularly, 3 or 4 issues in a year. It had long articles. The very first issue carried a very big summary of Edward Said's Orientalism. Then there was something on Julia Kristeva. There would be something on Derrida. And they also translated. It positioned itself as a Dalit critical magazine. And one of the very important things that this journal did was it started attacking the Tamil literary canon. It talked about caste openly for the first time. This was one journal. So this was also a very important institutional location for, even though the journal was small, it created that forum for questioning things, questioning things in a very, very radical way. Words which we would not, even dream of using 15 years ago. Because of Nirappirigai, the words began to be used, and now it is part of common parlance. I don't think, 15 years ago, I could have even thought of a word for anal sex. But in this journal, they coined words for it. They were used so freely, and it changed the language. It changed the vocabulary. It changed, or it drew the line for public acceptability at a different level. Very enabling moments. The other very important factor, which I think I've slipped it because I've just added it with an arrow. In 1983 was, of course, the July riots in Sri Lanka. It's impossible not to get autobiographical for some kind of survey like this. 1983 July riots. My very first political rally was to join a rally, condemning the atrocities of the Sinhala Sri Lanka army. So Sri Lanka after 1983, for about 30-40 years earlier, the post-colonial situation had created, such a huge undividable gap, created a huge undividable gap between Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka. After 1983, it changed. Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka, in terms of the cultural and literary map, it became one. Suddenly you find that you have larger number of readers. You can publish larger number of books. And after the first 5 to 10 years, when there was a big diaspora, and the Sri Lankan Tamils, very energetic, resourceful, industrious, wherever they went, they created communities for themselves. They supported literary activity in Tamil Nadu by the simple act of buying books and reading them. And also many things, which would have been very difficult. I also need to say something about the use of digital technology in a little while. Many of the Sri Lankan Tamils were the true pioneers in getting Tamil into the internet, into making Tamil adapt to digital technologies very easily. I think, for the other Indian languages, even Hindi, it had to be done through the aegis of the state. In India, in Tamil Nadu, the wonderful adaptation of Tamil language to digital technology was done outside the purview of the state. It took place because of independent, non-state initiative. The Sri Lankan ethnic issue also, in a sense, expanded this Tamil public sphere that I am talking about. It is in this context you find that there is a great amount of unleashing of writing it. There's a huge surfeit of writing. People are writing poems, stories, essays, and I think essays become a very important form. That is, non-fictional writings become a very important form of communication. Until then, a writer is only a poet or a novelist or a short story writer. Not somebody like me would have absolutely no place. I would have had no place, which is true. Until this moment, the first 10 years of my writing career, I don't know who read my books. But now I know. At least there are some people who are reading it. In this context, there was a huge publishing boom. There was the critical writing that I have talked about. That is one aspect. But the huge amount of creative writing. And I think it is at this time that there is a phenomenal change in the social profile of Tamil writers. Nirappiriga is one of the tasks that it undertook was something which the Indian census operations never undertook. It actually did on a day-to-day basis, did a caste profile of many of the writers. It was so astonishing to see that, most of the writers, modern Tamil writers, until the 70s and even the 80s, came from Brahmin or the very top crust of the non-Brahmin caste. Yes, of course, the Brahmin presence was always felt, but it became so obvious, when one looked into the profile of each individual author, that the entire canon of modern Tamil writing had been created by upper caste male persons. But this, I said, from about the beginning of the 1990s, is completely changes. And also, perhaps I should put in a couple of other, factor in a couple of other things before actually talk for a few minutes about this new crop of writers. Translations have always been very important in Tamil Nadu. It's very surprising because, Tamil people have always had to carry the burden of being chauvinist. And it implies that, they do not want to, they are not open to ideas and writing from other places. But it's actually not true at all. In modern Tamil literary culture, Bengali was always very big, right from the 1900s. We translated Bankim. In fact, somebody translated a Bankim novel which Bankim never wrote. And there was translations from Marathi. There are many people in Tamil Nadu who think that, apart from, of course, Devdas is a Tamil hero. Like almost all regions in India think that, Devdas is their own thing. But Kandekar, the Marathi writer, was very important. Translations from Hindi were also published, Premchand and others. But if these other Indian writers influenced Tamil writing in the 30s, 40s and 50s, from the 60s, it was, translations from the European languages. Whatever might be your criticism about USSR, the fact that, they published such beautiful books, even though they translate, I know why I think the Russian masters are truly great. They worked even despite the very poor, atrocious translations that came from the Progress publishers. It's impossible not to miss it. Once again, I think I have to allude to Salma's comment this morning about reading about Russian literature. But I just want to add a couple of names. You would think only of, when you talk about the Russian masters, you would think only of Gogol, Chekhov, Dostoevsky, and Tolstoy. But I think she has some other names in mind, like Chingiz Aitmatov. I don't know if people read Chingiz Aitmatov in the US. I am sure nobody has heard of Russell Gumstow, I presume. Excuse my hubris. Russell Gumstow. And this is also important because I think it is very liberative for somebody like Salma because, Chingiz Aitmatov, Russell Gumstow, they were from Muslim communities. They had a very difficult relationship with the Russians. But, their works were published. People, they were fascinated by the world that Chingiz Aitmatov created. I think Zamila, Gulsari, they were, novels that captured the imagination of many writers. If this was, if they captured the imagination of writers and readers with, with the evocation of life in these regions, other influences were there. Like, for instance, Albert Camus' Outsider, the Tamil translation, it was published by a publisher who refuses to sell the copies that he publishes. You find such people in Tamil Nadu. I think it must have been, only 2,000 copies must have been sold. But that novel had such a big impact on writers. A new way of looking at life, and also, somebody mentioned that, Camus, is left. But in Tamil Nadu, he's not seen as the left. He's seen as the response to the left. It is always Camus and Sartre. And Camus was seen as, as somebody, who was true and sincere to the craft and the art. The translation, once again, also by the same publisher, Kriya, Antoine Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince. These kind of works had a big impact. And of course, from the mid-80s, this Latin American writing, it just swept the Tamil literary field. Everybody was talking about Gabriel Garcia Marquez. They were, translating stories from Spanish. Neruda was always big. But I remember, in 1989 or 90, a huge 400-page special number was published, first about Dostoevsky and then about Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So, when I'm talking about, this new talent that came into Tamil writing, they also just did not come just like that, I have a very interesting story to say. I have a sob story to say. I've gone through very difficult times. I want to make you feel guilty. I'm writing this. It was not so. Many of these people, they actually came very well aware of the literary craft. They were up to the latest in modern writing. So they came together, they brought these things together, and that's why you find that, the writing that came out of this time, even though, you find a lot of Float Sam and other things, a good amount of this work is of extraordinarily high quality. So, and these journals, especially I think Kalachud has played a very important role. It gave a free rein to writers. It provided the forum for, for Dalit writers, women writers to publish without any inhibition.